Part 4. Balu devoted himself to the art of cultivating leisure. He was never in any undue hurry to get out of bed.
At about 9 o'clock, his father came to his bedside and gently reminded him, "Had you not better get up before the coffee gets too stale?" Balu drank his morning coffee, demanded some tiffin, dressed himself, and left the house. He returned home at about 1 o'clock and sat down to his lunch.
His mother waited for him interminably. He came home any time after 1. Sometimes he came home very late.
Even then he found his mother waiting. "What are you waiting for, mother?" he asked.
She never answered the question but went on to serve him his dinner. After dinner, he went up to the shop opposite, bought betel leaves and areca nut, chewed them with great satisfaction, and sat down on a dealwood box placed in front of the shop, watching the goings-on of the street for a while and smoking a cigarette, after making sure his mother was not watching. If he saw any elder of the house or of the next house coming out, he turned the cigarette into the hollow of his palm and gulped down the smoke.
After this luxury, he suddenly got up, crossed the street, and went back to his house. He spread a towel on the granite floor, in the passage from the street, and, cooled by the afternoon breeze blowing in through the street door, was overcome with drowsiness and was soon asleep. He was left undisturbed.
He woke from sleep only at 5 in the evening, and immediately demanded something to eat and drink, washed himself and combed his crop and went out. He returned home only after 10, when the whole town had gone to sleep. By this time, his father had already come home and was fretting, bothering his wife to tell him where Balu had gone.
He had got into the habit of feeling panicky if Balu absented himself too long from home. But the moment the door opened and Balu came in, he became absolutely docile and agreeable. He said, "Oh, Balu has come?"
with tremendous enthusiasm, and as he went in to change, asked with the utmost delicacy, "Where have you been?" avoiding to the best of his ability any suggestion of intimidation or effrontery. The boy just said, "I've been here and there. What should I be doing at home?" 6 months of this life and the boy became unrecognizable. There were fat pads under his eyes, his chin was dibbling, and his eyes seemed to shrink down to half their original size.
Margaya wondered what to do with him. Must do something so that he is able to grow up like other normal boys of his age, otherwise he will rust. He thought that the best solution would be to marry him.
He sent out his emissaries, and very soon the results became evident. From far and wide horoscopes came in, and letters asking for his sons in return. Margaya carefully scrutinized the status of those who clamored for his alliance.
It was like the state ministry scrutinizing the wedding proposals of a satellite prince. The chief assistant in this business was his accountant Shastri. He had acquired a new status now as a matchmaker.
As he sat in his corner copying in his ledger, Margaya said from his seat, "Shastri, do you know anyone with a daughter?" "Yes, sir," Shastri said, pleased to have an opportunity to look up from his ledger. "Yes, sir, quite a lot of inquiries have been coming my way, sir, for Balu."
"Then why didn't you mention the matter to me? You may be sure, sir, that when the right party comes they will be brought to you. Till then it does not seem to be very necessary to trouble you, sir."
"Quite right," said Margaya, pleased with his accountant and feeling his own eminence unquestioned and clearly placed. "You are right, Shastri. I am very keen that if there is to be an alliance it must be with a family who have a sense of—" "I know, sir. They must at least be your equal in status, sir."
Status. Margaya laughed pleasantly.
"I don't believe in it, Shastri. It's not right to talk of status and such things in these days. You know I'm a man who has had to work hard to make money and keep it. But I never for a moment feel that I am superior to anyone on earth."
"I feel that even the smallest child in the road is my equal in status." "Very few there are, sir," said the other, "who are so wealthy and are so free from vanity or showiness. I have known people with only a tenth of what you possess, sir, but the way they—"
"How do you know it is only a tenth of what I have?" Margaya asked, his suspicions slightly roused, for he let the other keep only one set of accounts. The other set, which gave a fuller picture of his financial position, was always in his possession. Had this fellow been peeping into his private registers?
The man gave a reassuring reply. "Any child in the town can say who it is if he is asked to name the richest man." It was very flattering and true, but Margaya hoped that the income tax people would not take the same view. Further development of this conversation was cut off because 3 clients from a far-off village came in asking, "Is this Margaya's?"
At once Margaya and his assistant fell silent and became absorbed in their work. When anybody entered with that question on his lips, it meant that he was a new client. He had been sent in by one of Margaya's agents, and he would want ready cash before departing for the evening. Margaya said, come in, friends."
"May I ask who has sent you along?" They had come with the right recommendation. The 3 villagers came in timidly, tucking in their upper cloth.
Margaya became very officious and showed them their seats on the mat. It was as if he had reserved for them special seats on fresh carpets and divans. He then said, "Will you have soda or coffee? Or would you care to chew betel leaves?"
He turned to Shastri and said, "Send the boy down to fetch something for them, they have come a long distance." "You came by bus?" "Yes, paying a fare of 12 annas, and we want to catch the evening bus, if possible."
They went by the evening bus, but leaving their mortgage deed behind, and carrying in their pouches 300 rupees, the first installment of interest on what was already held at the source. The first installment was the real wealth, whose possibilities of multiplication seemed to stretch to infinity. This was like the germinating point of a seed, capable of producing hundreds of such germinating points.
Lend this margin again to the next man, as a petty loan, withholding a further first installment, and take that again and lend it with a further installment held up, and so on. It was like the reflections in 2 opposite mirrors. You could really not see the end of it. It was a part of the mystic feeling that money engendered in Margaya. Its concrete form lay about him in his iron safe in the shape of bonds, and gold bars, and currency notes, and distant arable lands, of which he had become the owner because the original loans could not be repaid, and also in the shape of houses and blocks of various sizes and shapes, which his way of buying interest had secured for him in the course of his business, through the machinery of distraint.
Many were those that had become crazed and unhappy when the courts made their orders, but Margaya never bothered about them, never saw them again. "It's all in the business," he said. "It's up to them to pay the dues and take back their houses.
They forget that they asked for my help." People borrowed from him only under stress and when they could get no accommodation elsewhere. Margaya was the one man who easily lent.
He made the least fuss about the formalities, but he charged interest in so many subtle ways and compounded it so deftly that the moment a man signed his bonds, he was more or less finished. He could never hope to regain his possessions, especially if he allowed a year or 2 to elapse. There were debt relief laws and such things.
But Margaya nullified their provisions because the men for whom the laws were made were enthusiastic collaborators in his scheme, and everything he did looked correct on paper. He acquired a lot of assets. But he lost no time in selling them and realizing their cash again, and stored it in an iron safe at home.
"What am I to do with property?" he said. "I want only money, not brick and lime or mud," he reflected when he reconverted his attached property into cash. The only property he often dreamt of was the one at the foot of the Mempi Hills, but somehow it was constantly slipping away. That fellow, Kand, came again and again, but always managed to retain his ownership of his lands.
Shastri turned up with quite a score of offers for Margaya's son. Margaya felt greatly flattered and puffed up with conceit. This was evidence that he had attained social importance.
He had never thought that anyone of consequence would care to ally with his family. There was a family secret about his caste which stirred uneasily at the back of his mind. Though he and the rest were supposed to be of good caste now, if matters were pried into deeply enough, they would find that his father's grandfather and his brothers maintained themselves as corpse-bearers.
They were 4 brothers. The moment anyone died in the village, they came down and took charge of the business from that moment up to dissolving the ashes in the tank next day. They were known as corpse brothers.
It took 2 or 3 generations for the family to mitigate this reputation, and thereafter, they were known as agriculturists, owning and cultivating small parcels of land. No one bothered about their origin, afterwards, except a grand aunt who let off steam when she was roused by declaring, "It's written on their faces, where can it go, even if you allow 100 years to elapse?" It was Margaya's constant fear that when the time came to marry his son, people might say, "Oh, they are after all corpse bearers, didn't you know?"
But fortunately this fear was unfounded. At any rate, his financial reputation overshadowed anything else. Horoscopes and petitions poured in by every post.
It produced a sense of well-being in Margaya, and a quiet feeling of greatness. Shastri had done his part of the work efficiently. He had set aside all ledger work for the moment, and had written out scores of letters to men known to him within a radius of about 200 miles.
He was a compendium of likely parties with daughters to marry. He went out and saw in person quite a good many locally, as an ambassador. In all his correspondence and talk he described Margaya as the Lord of Uncounted Lakhs, or as one who was the richest in India.
And he spoke of Balu as inheritor of all this wealth and an apprentice in his father's own business, and a young man whose education was deliberately suspended because his father, having his own idea of education, was more keen on training the young fellow in business than letting him acquire useless degrees. Margaya scrutinized quite a file of applications and horoscopes. He rejected most of the proposals.
They were from quite unworthy aspirants. Margaya felt, why should these people waste my time and their own? Are they blind?
I have a certain position in life to keep up, and I naturally want only alliances which can come up to that expectation. Finally he picked up the horoscope of a girl who seemed to him desirable from every point of view. Her name was Brind.
She was 17 years old. Her father in his first letter described her as being extremely fair. He was a man who owned a tea estate in Mempi Hills.
At once it biased Margaya's mind in his favor. It was not a very large estate but yielded an income of 1,000 rupees a year. Margaya sent Shastri out to fetch an astrologer.
There was one practicing in the lane behind the market road. A man presently entered with beads at his throat and sacred ash on his forehead, wrapped in a red silk toga and dressed every inch for his part. There were a few of Margaya's clients waiting for him, and he had to dispose of them before he could attend to the astrologer.
He seated the astrologer and made him wait for a few moments. The astrologer fretted at having to wait. He sat shifting uneasily in his seat, cleared his throat, and coughed once or twice in order to attract attention.
Margaya looked up and understood. He interrupted himself in his work to tell the astrologer, "Hey, Pandit, can't you remain at peace with yourself for a moment?" The astrologer was taken aback, but curbed his restlessness.
Margaya disposed of his clients, looked up and said, "Come nearer, Pandit." The astrologer edged his way nearer. By his manner and words, Margaya had now completely cowed the man.
It seemed necessary as a first step to dictate to the planets what they should do. Margaya had made up his mind that he was going to take no nonsense from the planets, and that he was going to tell them how to dispose their position in order to meet his requirement. His requirement was the daughter of a man who owned tea estates in Mempi Hills, and he was consulting the astrologer purely as a formality.
These were not days when he had to wait anxiously on a verdict of the stars. He could afford to ask for his own set of conditions and get them. He no longer believed that man was a victim of circumstances or fate, but that man was a creature who could make his own present and future, provided he worked hard and remained watchful. The gold bars in the safe at home and the cash bundles and the bank passbook are not sent down from heaven, they are a result of my own application.
I need not have stayed at my desk for 10 hours at a stretch and talked myself hoarse to all those clients of mine and taken all that risk on half-secured loans. I could just have sat back and lost myself in contemplation. His mind sometimes pursued such a line of thought.
But he at once realized that it was not always quite safe to think so and added the rider, "Of course Goddess Lakshmi or another will have to be propitiated from time to time. But we must also work and be able to keep correct accounts and pay for what we demand." This was no doubt a somewhat confusing and mixed-up philosophy of life, but that was how it was, and its immediate manifestation was to say to the astrologer, as he pushed before him his son's horoscope and the tea estate daughter's, "Pandit, see if you can match these horoscopes."
The Pandit put on his glasses and tilted the horoscopes towards the light at the door and studied them in silence. Margaya watched his face and said, "What is your fee for your services?" "Let my fee alone," the other said.
"Let me do my work properly first." Margaya said, "Well, probably I shall be able to add a couple of rupees to your usual charges, and if the alliance concludes successfully, well, of course, a lace dhoti and all honors for the Pandit." Give me a pencil and paper, the other said briefly.
The astrologer filled the sheet of paper with numbers and their derivatives, and worked up and down the page and on the back of it. He asked for another sheet of paper and worked up further figures. Margaya watched him anxiously.
He said softly, I want this alliance to go through. I shall appreciate it very much if you will work towards that objective. I can show my appreciation concretely if.
The astrologer shook his head and muttered, Impossible, you will have to find. I don't want you to talk unnecessarily, Margaya said. The 7th and 9th houses in your son's horoscope are not quite sound.
The girl's marriage possibilities are the purest. The two horoscopes cannot match, they are like soap and oil. I have no faith in horoscopes personally.
Then you need not have gone to the extent of looking at these, the astrologer said. Margaya felt angry. He asked finally, Is there nothing that you can do?
Absolutely nothing. What can I do? Am I Brahma?
Margaya could not trust himself to speak further. He called across the room, Shastri. Yes, sir.
Give this Pandit a rupee and see him off. Yes, sir. Shastri proceeded to open a money bag. The Pandit said, A rupee.
Am I a street astrologer? My fee is usually. I am not interested.
My fee for such service as you do is just 1 rupee maximum. You will not get even that if you misbehave, said Margaya, and he shot out his hand and snatched back the horoscopes and the sheet of calculations. He looked for a moment at it to see if he could read anything.
It was a maze of obscure calculations and figures. He thought of tearing it up, but remembering that he had paid for it, folded it neatly and put it into his personal desk. The astrologer got up loftily and walked towards the accountant, received his rupee with an air of resignation, and strode out without relaxing his looks.
Dr. Pal helped Margaya to find a different astrologer who rearranged the stars of Balu to suit the circumstances. Margaya did not meet the astrologer in person. Dr. Pal took upon himself the task.
He made several journeys between the astrologer and Margaya carrying the envelope containing the horoscopes, and finally came back one day with the astrologer's written report on a saffron-tipped paper. The report said that the two horoscopes perfectly matched, with reasons adduced. Considering the mightiness of the task, the fee of 75 rupees which Drive Pal said the astrologer charged was purely nominal. Events then moved briskly.
Dr. Pal's services became indispensable and constant. He saw Margaya through the preliminary negotiations, the wedding celebrations, and the culmination in a newspaper photo with Balu wearing tie and collar, his handsome bride at his side. It was the 3rd year of the war, and Margaya decided that the time was now ripe for starting a new line.
He walked into Drive Pal's tourist home and asked, Doctor, how are you faring? Not badly, said the doctor. Margaya observed the dust-laden table, the penholder which had not been moved, and the unwritten sheets of paper before him, unmistakable signs of dull business.
Margaya settled in the chair and began, Doctor, I think you ought to make more money. Why? Just for your own good.
I will show you a way, if you like. I'm quite contented with what I have. You are not, sir, said Margaya.
You forget I'm also in the same building as you are. Don't tell me that there are many fellows coming into your office to seek your assistance in tourism or whatever it may be. Dr. Pal became submissive. I have tried one thing after another in life.
You know I am a qualified sociologist, one of the handful in this country. Let us not talk of all that, said Margaya, not liking the idea of going back to the domestic harmony days. It was something which had gone clean out of his mind, except one copy of the book which he retained as a memento of his earlier days and which he kept locked up in his iron safe at home for fear that Balu might get at it.
Fortunately, he felt, his daughter-in-law's father did not seem to have heard anything about his association with it. Otherwise he might never have gone through with the alliance. It was as risky as the ancestry of his corpse-bearing grandfathers. And so now he cut short Drive Pal's reference to sociology and psychology as if it were dangerous talk, and said, I want to do you a good turn.
Why? Asked the doctor. Because, began Margaya, and was about to say, you did me a good turn once by forcing on me your manuscript, but checked these words, and said, don't ask why. Because I have known you for a long while, and have seen you also, and I sincerely wish that you could make a little money and live comfortably.
Tourism, said Drive Pal, is a very honorable and paying proposition in the West, but here nobody cares. There is not a single person anywhere here who knows the history and archaeology of the country roundabout. Do you know that there are half a dozen different jungle tribes to be found on the top of the Mempi Hills?
All of them live, breed and die in the jungles, but there are so many differences between them. No intermarriage? My tourism does not confine itself to telling people, there is the river, there is the valley, here is big game, and pointing to a few ruined temples. That's not my idea of tourism. It's something different, something that's as good as education.
But it hasn't been a paying line, said Margaya, growing impatient with his lecture. For the moment, if you want a good income, listen to me. If I throw out a word about it, I am sure there will be dozens ready to take it up, but I want to give you the first chance because, he once again narrowly avoided reference to domestic harmony, and said, because, I've been seeing you for quite a long while, and I would like to see you prosper.
There was another reason why Margaya wanted to help, which was also not mentioned. He found Drivepal hanging too much about his son's establishment at Lawley Road. Margaya gave one of the houses he had acquired to his son for setting up a family independently, although Margaya's wife did not much like the idea of living separated from him.
But Margaya told her, think for a moment, my dear girl, Brint comes from an up-to-date family, and already shows her superior training. Is she very comfortable in this house? His wife thought it over and agreed, I don't think so.
Balu has been saying that the new room you have put up on the terrace is not good enough. In her father's house she has 4 rooms, all her own. She added, the girl hardly comes out of her room all day.
I have to call her a dozen times before she will come downstairs for her meal. I hardly see anything of Balu either. He doesn't speak much.
I'm probably not good enough for a modern girl like her. Tut. Margaya said to her.
Don't get into the habits of a mother-in-law. I like the girl very much myself. If those two are happy, I think it's best they are left alone to manage their affairs in their own fashion. I have recently acquired a house in Lawley Extension.
I think it best that they move off there. So far, exclaimed the mother horrified. It's not so far as you imagine, just half an hour by a jutka.
He studied her face for a while and added, don't make a fuss. The boy is 18 years old and he ought to look after himself. The girl will manage the household for him.
To Margaya's wife it seemed an unthinkable proposition. They hardly know how to boil water or even to light an oven. They will learn everything, Margaya said.
And they can engage a cook if they want. He was adamant, sooner or later the boy will himself open the subject and ask for this and that. If he does that it will annoy me very much, and I will resist.
I'd rather do things before he speaks, it'll look better. I will give him a house and a settlement. I want to see if that will make him think of doing something with his time.
His wife did not like the note of irony in his voice and protested, you have already forgotten what happened. I dread to think you have already started again thinking you ought to improve him. Margaya's wife nearly broke down on the day Balu bundled up his clothes into a neat leather suitcase presented to him by his father-in-law, put them into a taxi and drove away with his young wife.
Margaya's wife had spent a good part of an entire week in running up and down between Vinayak Mudali Street and Lawley Extension, arranging the bungalow at Lawley Extension for its new occupants. The girl prostrated at her mother-in-law's feet before taking leave of her. Balu, a taciturn man, just said, I'm going, got into the car, and sat down leaving space for his wife.
Margaya's brother's family had crowded on the parapet of the next house. Margaya himself was away, for it had been a busy day for him at his office. The house for Margaya's wife seemed to have become dull and lonely without her son.
It reminded her of the days when he had gone away without telling anybody, but Margaya noticed no difference because his mind was busy formulating a new plan which was going to rocket him to undreamt of heights of financial success. Margaya observed that after Balu settled in his new house, Dr. Pal became a constant visitor there. Whenever he went there, at the end of a day's work, he saw Drivepal settled comfortably in the hall sofa.
He played cards with Balu and his wife. He also suspected that Drivepal constantly took cash from his son. Margaya did not like a man who could write domestic harmony to associate with young, impressionable minds. He would probably recite passages from it, talk over further projects with his son, and he couldn't say what Balu might or might not do under those circumstances.
At any rate, it seemed imperative to wean his son away from Dr. Pal, and it seemed best to do it by employing Drive Pal's hours usefully and so making it unnecessary for him to go to the youngster, at least for money. Now Margaya told Drive Pal, "You can make 1,000 rupees a month easily if you will associate with me. After you have made some money, it'll be much more feasible to try your tourism to your heart's content."
"Are you willing to try and do something?" "Yes, definitely," said Drive Pal. At which Margaya began a lecture on money conditions.
The war had created a flood of inflated currency. All sorts of people were making money in all sorts of ways, some of it unaccounted or unaccountable. "You know what the market has been," said Margaya.
"This is the time when I wish to attract deposits rather than lend. People have money and are looking for a place to put it, and I look to you to get me a few contacts. I will make it worthwhile."
"You know all kinds of people as a journalist, and you are the man for me." "I will do my best," declared Drive Pal enthusiastically, thinking, "At least next month I can pay the stores, instead of dodging. I am tired of dodging. I am tired of this tame business of lending to my rustic clients," Margaya said.
"I want to do something better for a change. It does not mean I am giving up my village clients. I shall continue to serve them as a sort of duty to them, but..."
Margaya's instinct was right in choosing Drive Pal as his tout. He was a man who visited almost all the shopmen in the town every day. He knew the rice merchant in a certain back street who hoarded rice in a secret godown, whose frontage was stuffed with innocent-looking rag and old paper collected for the paper mills, who sold rice at about ₹1 for half a seer to needy people, and made an enormous quantity of money each day.
Dr. Pal knew the man who supplied office glue to the army and hoarded enough cash by showing a joint stock firm with imaginary partners, another merchant who supplied screws in cartons only half filled, the contractor who built huts and got enormous bills passed easily by bribing the garrison engineer. He was a rich man because his huts meant to stand for 3 years would stand only for a couple of months, till the bills were passed by the friendly garrison engineer. It was this margin that gave him real wealth.
There were drug stockists who didn't show their stock, but bargained when it was a matter of life and death to a customer. There were military men with pensions, and go-betweens and busybodies who could secure contacts at New Delhi for a consideration, people who could manage export and import priority. All these people had a lot of money, the town was reeking with it. Only a part of it came out in income tax returns, and the balance remained hidden in bundled-up currency notes in dark boxes. It was these that Margaya wanted to attract to his own stronghold.
Besides these, people generally had a lot of cash these days. Margaya had decided that all the cash must go to him. He had a feeling that, though by ordinary standards he might be termed a man of wealth, yet the peak was still a long way off.
He was like a fanatical mountaineer who sets his heart on reaching the summit of Everest. He might be standing on the highest peak, yet he can never feel that he has really attained the highest.
The blanket man was Drive Pal's first client. Dr. Pal sat in his shop amidst piles of dark blankets and lectured him so long that he expressed a desire to meet Margaya. Dr. Pal said, "I will see him first and speak to him.
He is very reluctant to accept deposits. But I think my recommendation will work. Wait until I see you again tomorrow." The next day he came to the blanket shop and took the man along to meet Margaya at his office.
Margaya effusively seated him on the mat, and went on with his work. He interrupted himself only for a moment to declare, "Still no light. As our landlord, you should look to our convenience."
"Certainly, I have ordered everything, it's coming," he said in his routine manner. Dr. Pal said, "Our friend Guru Raj has some cash, and wants your advice as to what he should do. He is himself an old businessman."
"Why does he need my advice?" said Margaya. The blanket man said, "After all, you are an experienced banker. Your advice will be valuable."
As he hesitated, Margaya threw a look at Dr. Pal and he got up and went away unobtrusively. Margaya drew nearer and in a confidential whisper asked, "Are you really serious about depositing your cash with me? No doubt I can offer you an interest of 20% on your deposit which you can draw monthly."
The blanket merchant gasped, 20%? Did I hear you all right? "Yes, I said 20%, said Margaya.
"I know what I am talking about. The banks are offering only 3%. I'm not concerned with them.
I'm not a bank, but I can guarantee you 20%. How do you manage it? Well, that is my lookout, Margaya said.
I have a business which yields me more. I have investments which give me probably 25%. I keep 5% and turn over the 20% to the depositor. After all, he said with a very virtuous look, I am using your money. Unlike the banks and cooperative societies, I believe you are entitled to the larger share as the owner of money.
You see, I have made enough money, he said with an air of sanctity. I don't want more. I only want to be of help to people, that is all, he said vaguely.
At the end of his talk, Guru Raj took out 5,000 rupees in cash and placed them on the table. Margaya swept them into his desk and wrote out a receipt. This is the receipt.
Anytime you want your money back, just take it to my accountant and collect your 5,000. But as long as you don't cash it, you can collect the interest on every first. As long as you do not withdraw the principal, you can draw the interest.
The blanket merchant went away with his head in the clouds. 20%. I have to dispose of 100 blankets a day if I have to make that money.
How does this man manage? On the following month when he went to Margaya's, the accountant gave him the cash. When he got this interest as a reality, the man was aghast and cried, that man Margaya is a wizard.
How does he manage it? Very soon the word, wizard, came to be bandied about freely whenever anyone referred to Margaya. His methods were too complex for anyone to understand.
The banks were puzzled. The deposits in their possession were all going. People speculated how the wizard did it.
No one had any clear idea. Nor could they get any enlightenment from Shastri or Dr. Pal. Margaya assigned to them only portions of certain duties, and attended to all things personally, and they never had a full knowledge of what exactly he did.
The whole town seemed to talk of nothing but this all day. People said that he underwrote shipments arriving at Madras port or Bombay and made money, that he discounted bills of lading, that he paid interest on capital out of a sheer desire to impress. But the fact was there that he seemed to need new clients each day, and Drive Pal had proved invaluable in this task.
He had now earned for himself a second-hand baby Austin, and brought into Margaya as at least a dozen new clients each day. Margaya calculated, if I get 20,000 rupees deposit each day and pay 15 in interest, I have still 5,000 a day left in my hands as my own.